welcome you to World Creativity Day, and thank you so much for giving your time to us. And like I was saying, Hattie is a lean startup coach at Rainmaking Venture Studio, and she's trained thousands of entrepreneurs in helping them build better businesses. And she's also a host of two podcasts, Adventures in Ventureland and Venture Out. So I'm sure you've been so busy with all these things on your plate. So we really appreciate you giving us some time to speak about this today. So welcome to World Creativity Day.
Thanks so much, Nirish. No, it's a pleasure to speak. It's a topic close to my heart, so I'm always happy to wax lyrical on it. So today we're talking about creation beyond conception. Very briefly, Nirish has done a very kind job of introducing me. I'm the founder of GuessWorks, which does teaching, coaching, training, entrepreneurship, education around all these things. I'm also a venture builder at Rainmaking Venture Studios, a lean startup coach and trainer, and corporate innovator. So very lucky to have had lots of experience doing this with people trying to do it in big organizations, people starting something from scratch, people with just an idea. So whatever level you're at, hopefully you can take something away from today. So briefly, we're going to look at 4 things today. Firstly, we're just going to cover off what makes an idea creative. There's a lot of ways this can happen. I just want to look at it briefly. Then we'll talk about what does that mean for our job as founders? How do we start to test and learn? And then where can we get inspiration from startups in the wild? So let's get started. What makes a business idea creative? Well, for me, there are 3 really broad categories. You could create on the tech. So one of my favorite examples is a company called PaveGen. They have killer technology. They turn your footsteps into energy, and it took them years to develop. Or other examples you may be more familiar with, Tesla, Google, Apple, all really focused on innovating on technology. You could also innovate on the business model. Again, one of my favorite startups here is called Beam. They're trying to fund homeless people into training and homes through a totally different platform using crowdfunding. Now, most business model innovations are technology enabled. This means that something already exists, you're not creating the technology, but what you're doing is innovating on the fundamental business mechanics and coming up with something new. Other famous examples, Airbnb, Uber, Amazon, Patreon, all great examples, but all not inventing their tech from scratch. So Uber relied on the fact that we all have GPS on our phones. Amazon did not invent the website, and Airbnb used things like photo on phones as well. So finally, you could come up with a brand new need that's never been met before. This category is actually harder than you think. Most things that we do today are an innovation of something that happened in another form or another business model previously. But a great example, as Nirish mentioned, I've been jumping on the bandwagon and trying podcasts during lockdown. And Descript is actually a tool invented specifically for all of the people who are trying to do podcasts, but they don't have an editing team. So they have a brand new need. Other examples are things like Slack and Zoom, which are trying to meet changing needs around remote working even before COVID. One I'm afraid we'll probably all become very familiar with is Verifly, who are looking at COVID passports in airports. And one that we might think of less is actually Microsoft. So again, there was a new technology, the personal computer, and it needed to be able to interface with us. So they created something to meet that new need. What I want to say though is whatever start point you have for your idea, or even if you don't have it yet, there is something that fundamentally ties all of these new ideas, if they're for a business, together. And that is this fact: established businesses execute, new businesses search. We don't know the answer yet. It's new. That's what all of these things have in common. And so ultimately, we come up against this wonderful quote by Steve Blank. In a startup, no facts exist inside the building, only opinions. What that means is that as entrepreneurs, it's our job to get out of the building and search for those facts, to learn what will work. So the question we're asking when we're doing that is really, what will make this new thing successful? Or put a more cynical way, what could kill your business? There are 5 things that investors, for example, really commonly look at that might kill your business. It could be timing, could be your team's fit for the business model or for the industry you're working in, Could be how much funding you have left and your access to new funds. Could be your product, or it could be just how fast you're executing. All common ways that startups die. The second most common thing, though, I think that kills startups is this: building something no one cares about. When we have this idea, it resonates with us, we're excited about it. That's why we build it, we believe in it. But ultimately, we have to test that entrepreneurial intuition before we have the full product. Otherwise, we're just going to market with something that's built on a gut, and that is why most startups die. But that's only the number 2 thing that will kill your idea. Above all else, the thing that will kill your idea is waiting too long to test your assumptions. Ultimately, whatever assumption it is, you want to de-risk it fast. Because if you get really good at this skill, de-risking assumptions, working out what is a guess in your idea and testing it, you might have more financial runway to pivot or change track. You might be able to find someone who's a better fit for your team because you identify those skills you're missing. Ultimately, it just makes you ready to move to whatever the business needs. And it makes you much better at realizing that your first best guess for that business is still changing and evolving. What this really comes down to, a lot of you may be familiar with this concept already, it's really common in the startup world, is lean startup. And there's 3 basic principles to lean startup that I just want you to understand today. Firstly, any startup idea is a big pile of guesses. That's why it's a startup, it's new. Someone hasn't done this and proven it yet. Secondly, the faster we can test those guesses in the market, the better we will do. And finally, the one that is least intuitive, learning is progress, building stuff isn't. I want you to remember that third one when we talk about experimentation today, because it's one that we emotionally need to grapple with. Whenever you have a new idea, whether it's for a business or just anything new, it feels better when we can come up with a way to prove to our friends, our family, investors, team, that we're progressing. And that progress feels like it should look like something tangible, whether that's a website, new users. You want to build something. But ultimately, what we need to prioritize is not the building, it's the learning. And if we prioritize the learning, then what we build typically looks very different. Now, in order to start doing this, once we understand those principles, we might look for tools that can help us. There are a ton of these in the market. I'm not going to go through them all today. If you want to learn more about startup tools, feel free to message me after. I can send you a ton of resources. But ultimately, the kinds of things we want to look at are things that allow us to unpick the risks in different areas. So for example, you might use a canvas, it could be the lean canvas, could be the business model canvas, whatever canvas, to map and unpick the risks in your idea so that you can see where you're making those guesses and where you still need proof points. You might explore your environment with desk-based research to try and understand trends that you don't control, but that still might kill you, or to understand, is the space you're going after big enough that it's worth chasing an idea in? You might also speak to experts and customers to shortcut your learnings. And ultimately, you could map the user journey, either of your new idea or of the user journey as it exists today. Either one will allow you to unpick risks, assumptions, frictions, and then you've got something to test. All of these tools are just there to help you really generate those assumptions. So you should end up with a load. If you're doing a new thing and at the beginning you don't have a ton of assumptions, it's either not new or you've mapped your assumptions wrong. So use these tools. Now we have a ton. We need to get very good at prioritizing them. Learning for learning's sake isn't learning. We need to focus on the things that are ultimately the highest priority to us. So how do we work that out? Another really quick tool I want to give you is a super simple prioritization matrix. You can draw it as a 1x1 or a 2x2, it doesn't matter. But what you want to do here is map each risk that you've come up with. So write every risk on a post-it note and rank how quick is it to test, how quickly could you get data on that, and how uncertain is it? How high a risk is it? What is the business impact? On that left axis, you're looking at ultimately the risk of fatality. If you don't know it's high uncertainty and it can kill your business, that's going to be really, really risky. So once you map all your risks, what you typically end up with, the first time you do it, that'll sit in the top right. Make yourself map them in relation to each other. Everything is relative when we're starting a startup. And then look at this and think, what should I test first? If it's high risk and fast to test, do it now. If it's slow to test, but it's long to test, but actually the risk is really high, try and break it down into smaller components so you can start testing it today. And otherwise, either ignore it or just make it a filler task for the time when you have no brain space. Okay, so we should now end, hopefully if we do this in real life, with some real priority risks. A quick way to sense check this. At the beginning, you should focus on desirability. The number one risk is, does anyone want it? Followed by, will they pay for it? Once you know that, then you want to ask yourself, can I do it? Is it feasible? And only when you know those two things do we start to worry about the viability of the business model. This doesn't mean you don't think about all of them up front when you're mapping your business model and try and design for them. But it means we don't spend too long trying to design for them before we work out what's most important to us. Because ultimately, if in testing for desirability, we realize no one wants it, we can stop there. Or if we find something else someone cares about more, the business model can fundamentally change. So we don't want to waste time testing those later bits when there's so much unproven upfront. So really helpful to test against your risks and check you've got these clear. Okay, let's give it a go. So say you have an idea. I'll give you some to play with for now. So say you've come up with a way to schedule social media posts so that you don't have to be online to send them. Now, most of us can do this today, but imagine you had this idea before it was mainstream. What is ultimately the biggest risk here? It's, does anyone care? Does anyone really want to do this? Or are they happy being online? Do they get better customer engagement that way? Can they respond to the tweets quickly? Ultimately, you want to ask yourself this question every time. How can I create a test to prove or disprove my idea fast or my risk fast? Now, one answer everyone forgets as a mechanism to test is talk to customers. This is one of the first things we should be doing, but it can go really wrong. And so people fall out of love with it as a test. If you're struggling to talk to customers, ask yourself, is it because I'm feeling shy, in which case force yourself to do it, I'm afraid? Or is it because you've done it before and you didn't get great data, or you don't know how to get started to get great data? If that's the case, I wholeheartedly recommend a book called The Mum Test by Rob Fitzpatrick. It's a super short read. It's very wittily written, and it is super enjoyable. But more than that, it will give you incredibly practical grounding to go and talk to customers and avoid bad data that can lead us to trust an idea that isn't great. So customers who lie, who just compliment us because they want us to stop talking to them, or they don't want to hurt our feelings, or people who are really optimistic about how they'll behave in the future, but actually, when it comes to a purchase decision, they don't end up doing it. So that's step one. Say you've done that and you've got some directional data that you think that people care about this. How could you get even more data on this? Well, this is a classic example some of you may have seen before, but it's a beauty, so I'm going to go through it quickly. This is for Buffer. So Buffer do exactly this idea, buffering your social media content for Twitter. Now, they also do today other social media, but it started just for Twitter. So what they designed was a really simple, what's called a landing page test. Now, a landing page test is a single page website that you create as an experiment. And on that landing page, you have one call to action and super clear communication. You're not spending days and weeks building a website. You're focusing on keeping it clear. So if you look at this example, it says tweet more consistently with Buffer. That's your value proposition. And then 3 very simple steps of how you can do it. So you understand what you're getting involved in. And then 1 call to action, which says plans and pricing. Now, if you clicked plans and pricing, you would get to this. Hello, you caught us before we're ready. And a box to enter your email if you're still interested to know when it actually launches. Now, what the founder Joel was measuring here was when he added a little bit of friction in the journey. Would people still sign up? Did this resonate so much they wanted it later, even if they couldn't have it today? And only when he was convinced by the number of people signing up here did he move on to his next test. So ultimately, Joel got a load of people who signed up their emails. Now he wanted to know something else. Will anyone pay? Is this just a great tool, or is it actually a business? So he asked, how could he create a test to prove or disprove it fast? Now, he had an experiment he could build on. The key to experimentation, you don't have to build on the last test you ran, only do it if it gets you the learning faster. But in this case, it did. So the biggest jump when you're starting to try and get money is getting someone to pay something, anything. 0 to 1 is a much bigger jump than 1 to 100. So Joel didn't need to know right now exactly what they'd pay. He could create some pricing buckets to check. But what he really wanted to do was see if they would pay. So he created a tiered plan. And again, you can see, super simple. There's a couple of points below each tier on the plan. And again, as soon as people clicked on a plan, he just recorded who's willing to pay and who's not, and then sent them all to the same page. Again, sorry, you caught us before we're ready. Sign up if you'd like to know more. Now, one of the reasons I love using this example is it breaks the myth that we have to really be cautious with the customers we use if we're building this kind of proposition. When Joel built the second variation of the test, he emailed everyone he'd captured the first time and sent them here. They ticked on the pounds and pricing. They got sent back to the same email page they'd already signed up for. And guess what? They signed up again because they cared. And by engineering in that friction, Joel had a lot more confidence that not only did they care about this, they really cared and they wanted to pay. And only then did he start building the solution. So that's a really common example. Let's look at another example quickly. So BarkBox is a dog food and toy subscription brand in the US. It's huge. And their founder, Matt Meeker, started exactly this way. He started by talking to customers. And once he talked to a ton of customers and got a ton of positive reactions, only then did he realize, actually, how much can I trust what these people are saying? Like they're giving me loads of compliments. How much should I trust it? And so he bought a little Zettel and he started taking it to the dog park. And when someone said they liked the idea, he pulled it out and asked them to buy. Now, this was super clever because A, it allowed him to check who was just complimenting him and who really cared, get real data. And B, he surfaced a ton of questions people weren't asking him before they were pushed to a purchase decision. And because he was doing it in person, he heard them all. So he heard people asking, well, where do you source your dog food? Well, and learned a ton about what they care about, how durable are your toys, all things that ultimately informed how he went and found products because he knew and understood his customers. So never underestimate the ability to build on customer development, customer conversations as a first test. Let's look at another example. Say you want to build a new speedy system to make burgers faster. This time though, what you want to test is, does it work? You've tested that people care, people do want their burgers faster. Now you want to know if it works. How could you prove or disprove it fast? Real example from McDonald's. I love this, one of my all-time favorite experiments. Now, you would think to test this, you would need a lot of money. You'd need to build a kitchen. You'd need to test it in real life. What they did instead was to hire a tennis court for an afternoon, take their team, so who would actually be manning the restaurant, and draw on that tennis court in chalk all of the stations. They redrew it multiple times every time they saw somewhere someone was getting stuck in the kitchen. And ultimately, they ended up with this speedy system. And all for the price of an afternoon of staff and a tennis court. But even better, all for the speed of an afternoon. Let's look at one more example, a marketplace for sharing food waste. Now we want to ask ourselves a question like, what do I need to build? Again, how can we learn it fast? So this is an example of Olio. So Olio today are doing just this. And ultimately, how they tested it was that they first put out a survey on Facebook. Now, I don't normally love surveys, but what they asked in the survey was how many people had a physical pain every time they threw away good food. And what they used that for was to identify people to then speak to. So they didn't just go with the survey data, they built on it. Now, they came up with a group of 12 people who said they were physically pained throwing away food. And they built a WhatsApp group. These people were all in North London, and they connected them. And the goal was to see how they would start sharing food and what would the challenges be that would inform the product build. Now, what they actually learned 2 weeks later when they ran their debrief in person with these people was that actually what they needed was only slightly better than WhatsApp. They didn't need intensive user reviews. They didn't need a ton of features they'd had in their roadmap. And so they could get to market faster, spend less, and waste less time actually proving the elements that were crucial to the business model. So again, super smart. It all comes back to this. Prioritize speed of customer validated learning above all else. There are hundreds of experiments you will find if you search for experiments for startups on the website. Talking to customers, a picnic in a graveyard is going and speaking to a founder who's tried it before and their startup's failed. You can do feature ranking with customers where you get them to move cards to rate the features they care about most. The landing page test we've talked about. You could do what's called a Wizard of Oz test, which is where you make the user think they're getting the end experience, but you're faking it behind the scenes. You could do like Olio, a concierge test, where you do the same thing, but they know you're faking it. You could do user testing, put it in front of them, see how they respond. Do that before you have a product. Try it with paper wireframes. Nirish taught me that. Practice pitching if you're selling into businesses or governments and see what questions you get on your pitch. Or if you're building something like a website, give it to someone, let them read it for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, as long as they want. And after it, ask them to play back to you what it said and see if they understood it. It's called a comprehension test. But those are just some examples. What I want you to take away is this. We want to find the fastest way to test our riskiest assumption today. Again, practical tools and tips. There are great resources available. I love the test and learn cards by Strategizer, which you can find for free on their website. But ultimately, what you're trying to do with anything, be clear on what you're trying to learn. Run one test per risk. I get tempted every time to be too clever. Don't. It just complicates it for you later. You won't know what data relates to what. One thing at one time. Set your metrics up front so you can't convince yourself after you've run the test that actually you didn't need 60 people. These 6 that really love it were enough. And focus on speed, not what you're building. Remember, it doesn't have to be digital or physical. The McDonald's example is a great case for that. If you want more inspiration, there's a great book on this called The Real Startup Book, also free, Creative Commons. Loads of founders have shared tests here. It's brilliant. And as you go through and pick your tests, remember, when you start, you're looking for directional data, not necessarily statistical significance. You'll come to that, but you're trying to learn as fast as you can. So ask them, watch them, sell it, fake it, compare it, do what you need to test your biggest risks. And don't forget that when you've tested one risk, you need to reprioritize and then rinse and repeat. Don't forget to go through this process of drawing out risks and reprioritizing them again. Otherwise, you're just running waterfall designed upfront development by another name because you've mapped all your risks in advance, and learning about them doesn't change the roadmap. So don't forget this step. And do things that don't scale. For me, the best entrepreneurs love to prove themselves wrong, almost as much as they love proving others wrong. If you want to know more about this, feel free to get in touch, email hello@guessworks.co or check out our website. If you want more on the BarkBox and the Olio stories, they're actually on our podcasts on Venture Out and Adventures in Ventureland. Feel free to message me if you want links. And any questions, feel free to email them across. Happy to answer, or we've got time for a few now if anyone has any.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that, Hattie. I've got so many nuggets that I've taken down here. Wow, my mind is just blown here. Loved how you said learning is progress, building stuff isn't. I mean, I'd never actually thought about that because we're so focused on just building things, and that's how I measure progress. That's been a really kind of eye-opening thing for me here. Like you said, directional data and the importance of that, rather than trying to kind of make it statistically significant. That's something that I can definitely take away from it. So I've got a question. So just quickly, what's the number one thing do you think stops people, entrepreneurs, businesses from testing more? Is it awareness, lack of awareness? Is it lack of time, money? Is it constraints? What is it?
I mean, I'm going to give a cop-out answer and say it's a few things at once. I think one is that there is so much pressure when we're building something to build at speed. Like, we have limited runway. And some of these tests emotionally feel like a step backwards. Like, I already know this because I've come up with it. And so I don't want to go back and test it. I want to go forward. And so there's this artificial feeling sometimes that testing ideas is slowing us down. And actually, the second thing is, I think then, is people who feel like that, they often haven't actually done it. Like they feel like they've spoken to customers. They've probably told some customers their idea and they said they loved it. So they're like, tick, done. They've not actually done rigorous customer development. They've maybe built a test and then feel like they're done. And ultimately, I think people are almost using experiments as the red light to build, or sorry, green light to build, as opposed to a continuous thing we should be doing the whole of our startup cycle. An example I love is a really successful a music startup. They were doing music streaming, and every month they would hold a big party. And they were big at this stage, and they'd play new music, and every party they'd take aside like 10 people into a room and try and show them new features and be like, what do you think? And the customers thought it was amazing because they were like, oh, I'm seeing it early. And the team got loads of insights, but they were big at this point. They were still embedding it into testing. So I think, yeah, we need to internalize that it's constant, that it's faster, not slower. It saves us time on the end build. It doesn't just slow us getting to there. And then it becomes easier. And then there's so many resources to start looking to find inspiration, that if that's what you're struggling with, have a Google, have a search, read The Real Startup.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Hattie. That's been really, really useful for me, and I'm sure it's been really useful for all the viewers as well. So we've almost run out of time, but we have a few more sessions for this afternoon. We have another session at 3 p.m. London time. So please do join us for that. It's going to be improv to use creativity through improv exercises. That's going to be really fun. Thank you so much, Hattie. We'll see you again soon.
Thanks so much, Nirish. Bye.
Bye.